This video will provide a brief introduction to Priority 5's tax software. It was most recently deployed on Sunnet, on a foreign network that was used by IndoPACOM and the JAIC during the pandemic, and that has also been previously granted ATO on both Nipper and SEPRNet. You're looking now at the Ops Center view. We just superimposed on that the web view. The only difference between those two is the Ops Center view has some analytic tools that are not in the web version. That's because people in the field don't need the analysis capabilities, so we don't put them on there. Anything that's been requested has been added, and we're capable of adding more things, but we want something very quickly, easily understood by people in the field without the clutter of additional tools that aren't needed. I'll mention right now that because I only have one screen, that Ops Center view that I'll be using most of the demo is going to occasionally have things dragged on it that normally would not be there. It's a multi-screen display. Now you're looking at the smartphone view. Again, all of the operational tools that are needed by people in the field. And by the way, we can also export the results of what we're doing here to ATAC. So it's an open architecture, it's compatible with existing tools, so it's not a rip and replace kind of a tool. And I think you'll see as we go along how the input from premise from the field feeds in to the system. And then finally, now you're looking at a dashboard view for the decision makers, flag officers. We can summarize this in many ways, regionally, trend type data like you saw before. And this is some information that was used in DC where you can link and drill down to more details, but basically the operational decisions are here. For the pandemic, we took some fairly complex medical trending data, but then reduced that to what do you have to do? So for example, when will a hospital run out of respirators, or when you're not going to have adequate staff because of illness? So the demo I'm going to do is in Doha to illustrate the capabilities of the software. We'll start with basically a peacekeeping type mission assisting local authorities with an event at Khalifa Stadium. Always start with the missions. So the mission here, in addition to the stadium security around the event, are also things like medical. What do you have to do to be sure that you have adequate medical facilities in event of a mass casualty type situation that we can do triage? So that leads to identifying all the critical assets that we need to keep track of. And when we identify those assets in tax, we identify them not just where they are by name, but we put in the parameters to know their operational status so that if something changes, like bed count, we see the display change. So the operational status changes. And if it affects the mission status, that changes as well. Now, single hospital failing doesn't really affect the mission because the hospitals in a single region still work. But if a substation were to go out and the cascading effect of loss of power affected multiple hospitals, which we also show because these assets have interdependencies, now we'll see an effect on the medical mission. And if we were to drill down, we'd see that one of the regions would not have adequate medical capability to handle triage. Now, to set up the event, we always look at what we call an event file, which has all the information in it that is necessary to run the event. So things like the organization chart, the steps along the way, so we know how to stage road closures, where to put personnel. This is the same approach we used with the Secret Service during the inaugurations, and we did that for 3 presidential inaugurations. So you can step through it in advance. All the procedures are in there if we need SOPs. Now, during the event, all the information, and again, you see how premise feeds into this, all the information in advance about the assets and coming in from contributors comes into a single alert inbox. Sometimes that information is immediately actionable, like spotting a drone where it shouldn't be. That immediately would be escalated into an incident, and that would trigger a workflow shown here. that the operator could step through, and it's configured to match the type of alert. Things like an SOP, ability for chat among the participants, looking at nearby security cameras. All of this is available in an orderly way that matches the nature of the event. We can also bring in third-party applications like an RF signal locator, so we can find whoever was driving the drone, for example, or any third-party tool. It's an open architecture specifically designed to accommodate these kinds of third-party tools so that they can be brought in and, as I mentioned before, displayed in other viewers. We can set up an exclusion zone. There's a whiteboarding capability, so on the fly, the user can determine where the evacuation area should be or what the extent of damage is likely. There's the ability to run simulations in real time. We have what's called a what-if mode, so that if this is a briefcase-sized package that was dropped by the drone, we can go to that location and say, what would happen if that were a bomb and it were to explode? So we go to the what-if mode, we run an ATF simulation of an explosion of that type, and we can see the impact. And meanwhile, other people can continue to track the live event. So we can explode it, and then if it were to do something like hit a power line, because we're tracking interdependencies, we can see the cascading impacts on other assets. So we might know which hospitals aren't available, or if transportation were affected, or the lights were to go out. We'll know that in advance. So we have this kind of capability for our planning purposes. All of this information is assembled. If there's an active shooter kind of information available, we might want to look at the ability to evacuate a VIP. That can be done using a 3D view. I have some rather poor 3D here, but you would normally fly this in advance and get good 3D with LiDAR type data. If you do that, you can locate a potential target and look at the best evacuation route. Obviously, better to do this in advance, but that's available. You can also look at the perspective of a shooter of what the range of vision is for the shooter. All of this information is put back into that event file we talked about at the beginning. And we have the ability at any time to replay the sequence of activities that occurred, so we understand, either for forensic purpose or for training after action reports, what happened, and replay that. You can supplement that with intel. So we can bring in pictures or information from the field that's been uploaded from those mobile devices we talked about, and see how the event developed. The other thing I want to touch on briefly is we talked about the information coming into a common alert inbox. Again, premise information may be coming in. Sometimes it's easy to understand, like a drone where it shouldn't be. Sometimes these things have to be put together. So there's a patented threat analytics system, an AI expert system, that looks at this information coming in, and in combination, if they're indicative of an evolving threat, like this one at the port, where we have a fake passport, facial recognition, and a suspicious vessel that the AIS is not matching the radar signature. That would be indicative of a potential terrorist activity and would trigger that. And so we could react to that as an escalated threat beyond one individual alert coming in. And again, I won't go through the same sequence of activities, but you would escalate that, you would set up the sequence of activities, and these alerts can either be manual or automatically trigger into action depending on the rules you set up into the system. Now what I want to do is take these basic capabilities and move them into a military type setting. So here what we have is a blue team, red team, where the blue team is defending a town on the other side of the river. You notice we've moved to a military type nomenclature where we have the postcards with the capability of the weapons that are the assets now in the system. And they're all being tracked. And here's a tactical situation. You see those green lines are the fuel supplies. We have a pipeline running along the river, and then the yellow indicates the fuel supply from the north has been compromised. So we have the pipeline, the fuel from the northeast is still good, but from the north is already out. So we've got to defend against the red force. So we're now monitoring the red force for activity. And this is where things like, again, input from premise, data coming in on the status of their assets that might come in advance, status of the infrastructure, all these things. Again, you see how the feeds fit together almost perfectly here. But we're monitoring for things like pattern of life change in the active threat. And when we see that, that would be an indication of the need to elevate the amount of surveillance that we have on the red force. So now we might want to do things like set up geofencing and look for a next stage of activity as they move within proximity of the bridge. So there are two ways that we can be attacked here, across the bridge or across the shallows in the river. And here we see a two-pronged attack coming in. Now I'm going to go straight to where we violate the geofence to react to this. Obviously, it would be better to do the kind of planning I'm going to show you before the fact and not wait until an attack is imminent here, as I'm going to do here. But once you have this kind of situation, again, this is a use for the what if that we talked about to look at COAs. So what are our options? If we were to block that bridge so that they can't cross the bridge to let that red team, which is the shortest route to the city, that is one thing we'd want to look at. So we can use our what if to do that and then see how that leaves us. So if we did the same kind of analysis where we looked at the effect of destroying the bridge, which would clearly block the advance, one of the questions would be, well, what does that do to other aspects of our tactical situation? And in this particular case, what we're worried about in my really simplistic demo here is the fuel supply. Because we know we have that fuel line under there. And what would happen here if we did totally destroy the bridge with the blast necessary to destroy the bridge, we're going to take out that fuel line. And what that means is that we're now down to the one fuel line, and you'll see as we just continue with this, we're down to the one fuel line remaining, which was up to the northeast. And then if we look at the possible courses of action that leaves the red team if it can't cross the bridge, the remaining approach is now through the shallows. And that means it's going to be essential to defend that remaining fuel line, because if that fuel line goes, depending on our operational energy planning, we may be without fuel. And the impact there on the weapons running on diesel fuel would be to disable them. So, and we'll just take that ahead. And again, bear with me, this is a simplistic demo. So you can evaluate courses of action. And again, you can see the input in real-time intel as we get this kind of information from premise. I apologize for the speed, but there's a 90-mile-an-hour tour of the software. Thank you.